So I've been back out for about a week again with my Black Lives Matter sign. Now I'm in Mobile versus the time that I spent out in Macon. But this video, I'm just gonna dive into how I got started protesting in Macon back in 2020 and what that first sort of week looked like. Before we get into my time in Macon, I have created a petition to remove the Confederate flag from the Mobile Police Department because I'm going to get them to actually redesign their shoulder patches like they said they were and remove the Confederate flag. I also think it should be removed from their badge, but one step at a time. So my protest actually began in May of 2020 in the back of the Chick-fil-A that I worked at because following the killing of George Floyd, I had so many people at work that were hurt and upset, and there were also people that I worked with that hadn't heard about what was going on. So I decided I was going to use my voice and speak out on what happened to educate those who hadn't heard and try to comfort, reassure those who were hurting. And so I took a whiteboard that hardly ever got used and I wrote out what happened to George Floyd, why we were seeing the explosive response that followed. And the next morning, I came into work and found out that someone I worked with had erased the black from Black Lives Matter that was on the board. And that wasn't going to stand with me. So when I got to work, I rewrote the board, reiterating Black Lives Matter, explaining what Derek Chauvin did to George Floyd and why the protests and the riots that we were seeing were completely justified. And I can't explain how great it felt to be able to get a difficult but very important conversation started with my coworkers and my managers, bosses at the store. I actually had one of my managers who reached out to me and in his message told me how great it was to be able to have that conversation and that I had gotten it started, and I felt like it was something I needed to do. I knew I was taking a risk, especially doing it at work, but if I didn't do it, I didn't know that anyone else would. So, a few days after all this happened, it was a Sunday afternoon. I was sitting at home scrolling through my phone and seeing all of the hurt and the anger and not knowing what to do about it or what to do with myself. I came across a post for a protest that was happening downtown. And I snatched up a cardboard box, ripped it up to make my first sign. And one side read very simply, Black Lives Matter. The other side had what would become my mantra, I will be heard or I will be dead. And I made my way downtown to the park that the protest was at. And when I got there, to my surprise, I had a couple of friends that I knew from high school who had seen the same post and felt the same way that I did and came out to use their voice and speak up. And it was a great protest. They had a few speakers and a few different singers. And after that all ended, me and my friends decided we really weren't done. We still wanted to be out and be seen. So we walked around downtown for a little bit and then we decided to reconvene at the roundabout at Tatnall Square Park. We chose that location because we knew inside the circle that we could be seen from any direction and we knew it was a fairly well trafficked area. So we stayed out for a couple hours and most of the response that we got was positive and that was very encouraging. We did upset a few people. We had somebody who threatened one of the members of our group, and of course they sped away as soon as the group came to confront them about what they had said. While we were out, I posed the question to the people in our group of how many people we thought it would take to fill the circle. And we had about 10 people in that original group, and we decided if we each brought 10 people back the next Sunday, we could fill that circle easily. So that was our goal. Next Sunday, we were gonna fill the circle. So the next morning when I woke up, I was still energized from the day before. So I grabbed my sign and I was headed back out. Where I was going, I really wasn't sure because I was going out by myself and I was nervous about that. So I wanted to be somewhere that I felt safe, somewhere I was familiar with, and if anything were to happen, somewhere that I'd have someone to help me if I needed. So I went and I stood outside of my church, Martha Bowman. And the reaction that I got while I was out was great. I even had a couple of people that came and stood with me. And after a few hours, I went home and got ready and went to work. But I wasn't done with my sign for the day. I decided I was taking my sign into work with me because I wanted to show my coworkers that I wasn't just talking about it, I wasn't just running my mouth, but using my actions to amplify the words that I was saying. So, one of my friends actually took this photo of me while I was on the way into work. But after my boss had caught me, the owner of the store, because he wanted to have a talk, he told me that he supported me and his main concern was people feeling unsafe or uncomfortable in the store, mainly in reference to my I will be hurt or I will be dead sign. And I told him that it was an uncomfortable topic, and sometimes it's necessary for people to be uncomfortable to understand and to grow, and that my mantra wasn't about anyone other than myself, and far from threatening. If anything, it's a cry for help because I don't want to be dead. I want to be heard. But I know that, like so many before me who have spoken out about similar issues, if I'm not heard, I will be killed. Even those who were heard to a degree, many were killed for what they said. But on that occasion, I agreed to leave that sign in my car, but my Black Lives Matter sign was still coming in. The following day, I got up and I was going back out with my sign again. This was going to be a regular thing for me. I was in it, but I wasn't sure where to go because I still wanted to move around Macon. So, I decided to go to the shops at River Crossing. It's an outdoor shopping center in Macon, and I spent a few hours out there before I was asked to leave by security. Apparently, a couple of the shops had called security and asked that I leave or be removed or whatever. And as discouraging as that was, it was even more encouraging the support that I received. I even had a coworker who saw me while she was out shopping and came back to bring me something to drink, which meant a lot to me because it was hot and I felt seen by her, which I appreciated more than I could put into words. When I got to work later that day after being asked to leave the shops, I decided that it was time to tell the people at work about my mantra, the 9 words that I'd been living my life by for the past few days. So I went in the store, and on that same whiteboard, I wrote out everything that I had to say about it, explaining that it's similar to give me liberty or give me death, but with the key distinction of I don't want death. I want the freedom without my people having to sacrifice their life. And I don't wish to end up like so many before me who have had their life cut short for speaking out against the things that I am. I did receive a bit of pushback from that whiteboard just because David didn't want that in his store, and while I understand and it was his store, I had taken that whiteboard and that space was mine, and I felt like it was appropriate to continue sharing what I was doing and to explain what I was doing so that anyone who may have been confused or felt threatened or anything like that could understand that there is aggression behind the message, but it's a call for help. The next morning when I went out, I decided I was going to stand outside of the store that I worked at because I wanted my friends and coworkers to be able to see me out, and even if it was just from the drive-through or through the front windows of the store, see that I am out and I'm doing what I'm saying that I'm doing. And while I was out on Tom Hill, I felt so much support from people honking, people shouting out of their car to support me. I had multiple people stop and bring me water, Starbucks drinks, Dunkin' Donuts, food from Chick-fil-A. It was incredible. The next day, I headed out to my boss's other Chick-fil-A that he owned because he told me that he supported me. And since I had just been outside his other store, showing my coworkers and friends what I was up to and the message that I had that Black Lives Matter and the injustices happening across this country need to be seen, recognized, and addressed. So why not run it by the other store too? And while I was out on Bass Road, I will say this was the first time that the hate was louder than the support. And that's not to say that the support wasn't there. I did still have people supporting me, but the hate was loud. The main thing that I got from people while I was out that day and in general was to go get a job, which frankly is one of the most infuriating things that they really could have said because not only did I have a job, but I was outside of my employer's other place of employment and actually the store that I would end up spending the tail end of my time at Chick-fil-A at. But people are dumb, so. The next day, I got out, and for the first time, I changed the sign that I held. It didn't say Black Lives Matter. It said Breonna Taylor would have been 27 today, because that day would have been her 27th birthday. And I headed out to Zebulon Road to stand in front of the Chick-fil-A out there. Now, that Chick-fil-A, not owned by the man that I worked for, and at this point I just decided I was going to hit the different Chick-fil-A's around town because why not? But that was one of the hardest days for me because as much as I hoped to get the people thinking with my sign, it had me thinking the entire time that I was out, and more so than I expected it to. As I stood out, I was thinking about my siblings, and I have an older sister whose birthday was the next day. And what if she hadn't made it to 27? At the time, my birthday was a few months off and I was turning 20. What if I had less than 7 years left? And I'm really not too proud to say that I cried. I cried on that sidewalk in front of that Chick-fil-A, and it was hard. I wasn't worried about what anybody was thinking driving past me because I was thinking about what happened to her and putting myself in that place, and I knew the pain and hurt that I felt was only fractional of what her family was feeling at that same time. And one of the most impactful things that I had happen while I was out happened that day. I had just pulled myself together, just stopped crying, and normally when I'm out, I'm very vigilant. I keep my head on a swivel. I know what's going on around me. Now, granted, when you're crying, it's a little hard to be hyper vigilant. So, this woman did manage to sneak up on me from the Chick-fil-A parking lot. Luckily, her intentions were entirely pure because she walked up to me and she asked if she could give me a hug. And partially because I had just stopped crying, and partially because it was just an incredibly sweet, thoughtful gesture, I broke down crying again in that woman's arms. And a complete stranger, I didn't ask her name. I wish I had. I have no idea who it was, but that hug there, that being seen, meant so much to me. And I decided, because it was my off day, I was going to go from Zebulon back to Tom Hill, Chick-fil-A, because there I had the most support and I needed a little hyping myself up after I got myself down a bit. Little did I know when I got to Tom Hill, I would be in for quite a surprise because not only did I have 3 or 4 people who showed up and stood out with me, had brought their own signs, they had seen me before and had hoped to find me there. But while we were standing out, we saw a news van pass us and pull into the Chick-fil-A parking lot, and we were talking about how cool it would be if they were there for us and came down and we were able to give an interview. And that's exactly what happened. And this was the first time that I was interviewed for my protest. I was incredibly nervous, and it's kind of an awkward video because this was during COVID, so the audio is through my phone to their microphone, and it's not great, but here it is.
Here at home, a Macon man and others, protesters, held signs near a busy road to bring awareness about Taylor on her birthday and other victims who've died. Darian Wilson held a sign saying Breonna would have been 27 years old today on Tom Hill Senior Boulevard. He says he's protesting years of oppression and discrimination against the black community. He says he hopes to see less injustice in the future.
I know that I have to fight because that's what's right, and I'm not stopping until I'm heard.
Wilson says he is also organizing protests in the roundabout at Tatnall Square Park on Sunday from 3 to 8 p.m.
Not only was this my first opportunity to speak to the news, but it also gave me the great opportunity to promote the protest that we were hosting to fill the circle on Sunday. I had created a Facebook event and been posting it and sharing it. I'd been inviting all of the people who came out to stand with me and really anybody who would listen. But being able to get it on the news, and I believe the 6 o'clock news at that, was big for getting the word out. We stayed out a little bit longer after I finished the interview and we parted ways. I went home to find myself on the news and get some more sleep before heading back to Tom Hill in the morning. So the next morning I went back to Tom Hill instead of going anywhere else because after being on the news, I wanted to be where I had been seen before, but also where people may be looking for me. So nothing too crazy happened that day following the interview, and nothing really could have gotten me down after being on the news and being able to talk about my protest. And being on the news, the Facebook post, I was very confident that we were going to have the people to fill the circle on Sunday. And after I was out on Tom Hill for a little while, I went to go get all the supplies that I was buying for the protest. So poster board, markers, drinks, different things like that. My church was kind enough to let me borrow a couple of coolers and use their ice machines to keep the drinks cold. And I went by my regular smoke shop to get a vape, and I only mention this because the owner of the smoke shop had seen me out and had seen about my protest and bought me a Bluetooth speaker to use while we were out, like during the protest. And this was big because this really changed the way that I went out by myself daily. Because now instead of just me and my sign, it was me, my sign, and the speaker. And the speaker added a fun new element where I was dancing around, not anything crazy, but just the energy of the music helping to motivate me through any hate or anger that people tried to throw towards me. Finally, the day of the protest came, and that morning my mom texted me and asked me if I had let the cops know about the protest. And I hadn't, and I really didn't want to because I don't really like cops. But I called them, I gave them a heads up because I didn't want them to be surprised by however many people showed up and were standing in the middle of the traffic circle. And it worked out pretty well. They sent a couple of deputies by to make sure that everything went well and everybody was safe, and I appreciate that from them. I gathered all of my supplies and things after church, so we had chips, water, sunscreen, bug spray, masks, gloves, markers, poster boards, everything that you could possibly need, as well as a couple of first aid kits, just in case. I was so amazed by the response that I got. While getting set up with my friends, who were some of the first to show up, the church down the street from us, Centenary, and Eric Maley, who was leading the church at the time, came down to the park and set up a tent and a table, and they had brought water and some more poster boards and markers for people to make signs. So I left some of my stuff with them so people would have a place to make signs. And the turnout was absolutely incredible. We had somewhere around 120 people at the peak, and we had over 150 people total come. It was 3 p.m. to 6, and I had coworkers, friends from church, my family was there, of course. Even my second grade teacher came and brought her family. And I felt so seen and so loved. Most of the response that we got while we were out was positive, which made it even better. And while we were out, 2 news stations came and interviewed me, which was incredible, being given another chance to use my voice and to be heard. And that's exactly what I wanted. So here's just a little bit from each one of those interviews that day.
Here in downtown Macon, one young man has said that enough is enough. And what started as a small protest last week has now turned into this.
I'm not going anywhere. Y'all gonna see me around Macon every day.
Darian Wilson says he set a goal to have 50 people protest with him in Tatnall Square. What he got was a community full of love and support. He says he was inspired by last week's peaceful protests against racial oppression and wanted to start his own. For him, it's personal.
I know that if it was my sister, if it was my brother, if it was my dad, I'd be broken.
Minister Eric Maley and other members of Centenary Church came out to help provide snacks, water, and sign supplies.
We are just sort of the landing station here for the protest. We want to stand in solidarity with our African American brothers and sisters and be a supportive force in the community.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Wanye Reese. As protests are happening throughout the country, some are happening right here in central Georgia. Today, roughly 80 protesters gathered at the roundabout outside Tatnall Square Park in Macon this afternoon. Take a listen.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome.
There you go. You hear those protesters singing "We Shall Overcome" and cars honking, showing solidarity with the protesters. Darian Wilson says he organized it to protest the systemic injustice and oppression of black communities in the United States. The Facebook event says they chose the location because it was a well-trafficked area. Their goal to fill the circle of the roundabout and let people know, as some signs read, quote, "All lives can't matter until Black lives matter."
The funny thing about when I did those interviews and learning about myself doing interviews is I get so anxious and in my head about saying the right thing and saying everything that I want to say that I don't remember what I've said once the interview ends. So when each of those interviews ended, I looked around to my friends around me and asked them what I said and was it good and how I did. And they reassured me that it was great and I said everything that I needed and wanted to. Shortly after those interviews, there was a car that pulled up and I saw them take a couple of pretty big boxes over to the tent that Centenary had set up. And I never saw who it was that unloaded the boxes from the car. I just saw it sort of happen. And so a little bit later, I walked over and asked what it was, and someone had come by and donated a couple hundred personal pies from a restaurant in town to the protest. So we started handing out pizzas to everybody. I never found out who it was to this day. I have no idea, but it was amazing. We even had a couple of my friends from high school, the people they invited, worked at the restaurant that they got the pizzas from, and they were telling us about this massive order that they had had before they got off, not knowing that that pizza was there with us. I felt so proud, not just of myself and my friends, but of my city, because I felt like Macon showed up, and not just in the people that came out to support me and stand with me, but also the people that saw us while we were out. There was so much love and support and honking and cheering. After everything was done and people were leaving, I made sure that any trash was picked up, and I gave out as much leftover pizza as I could. Still ended up with a couple dozen personal pizzas in my fridge somehow. And I thanked everybody that I could as they were leaving for coming out and supporting me. So after everything was all said and done at the end of the night, I went home and collapsed in my bed feeling accomplished, proud, seen, heard, and supported by my city. And the Fill the Circle became a weekly event that I posted on Facebook and protest that I hosted in that roundabout on Sunday afternoons. But I think that particular Sunday was paramount in me doing everything else that was to come that summer and the rest of the year. Because anytime that somebody shouted something hateful or rude at me, I could think back to that day that I was out and my city came out to support me in full force. So every Sunday I was in the roundabout, and the rest of the week I would go out and I stood in front of the Chick-fil-A at Tom Hill. And that became my permanent spot going out during the week, actually the following day. But the reasoning for that, the incident that caused that decision to happen, is a story for another time. So we'll get into that in the next video, why I felt like I needed to stand in front of the store where my employers could see me every day and let them know that I was dead serious. There was not a joking bone in my body. I meant everything I had written down on that whiteboard and everything I had talked about and stood out for. Thank you so much for watching. I thank you for the opportunity to be seen and to be heard. From the first whiteboard to that first Fill the Circle event was about a week and a half, but that week and a half was the foundation of the next year that brought me so many opportunities I never thought I would have, especially for something as simple as standing out with a sign and speaking out for a few hours every day. But until next time, y'all be safe, y'all stay strong, stay weird.